I am working to make the Wake Up America show the absolute best that it can be with the best interviews. But there's a reason why we have Daniela Pensack on today at 8:30. There's a reason why every Tuesday and Thursday we have Camellia Peterson on, because they are the best of the best in conservative libertarian talk. It's Camellia Peterson joining us right now, doing one of those weird car videos like those MAGA people will do where they scream into their camera phones. Good morning, Camellia.
Like, there will be no crying this morning on camera.
No crying. No, what you got to do is you got to get out like some of those like Oakley shades and then a MAGA hat and just start screaming to the camera like, the gay agenda is going to corrupt the children. We've got to have more tariffs and bigger taxes and school choices. A terrible plan.
I'd really have to work. That would be my acting would be so bad.
I don't know about that, Camellia. We're glad to have you here. You were so just like champing at the bit to talk about this story. We'll say like a thoroughbred. Why don't you go ahead and just be off to the races and tell us why you think women should or shouldn't be able to vote?
Well, I really think, my whole issue with this thing is not so much about the right to vote per se, as much about women like this Pearl, I don't remember her last name now, but anyway, Pearly Things on Twitter,
Yeah.
grifting on issues like this because, she's out there talking about women's right to vote and how they shouldn't have the right to vote. And she's echoing she's parroting all of these, red pill manosphere community talking points. She can't ever back anything up. You mentioned that she doesn't, like, she says all this stuff, but then when she gets questioned on it, she doesn't ever back anything up. And actually a lot of what she does has an effect on her audience that is actually contrary to what the red pill community is meant to do. But yeah, the women's right to vote. I mean, I'm sorry, no.
What do you mean? You're sorry? No,
She's
no, you don't think women should have the right to vote?
I think it's fine for women to have the right to vote. Can we talk about do women make bad decisions when they're voting? Of course. Are there men who make bad decisions when they're voting? Of course. So an
But
illustration
don't
of this, I
women make
think.
more bad decisions than men when it comes to voting? Don't women vote with their vaginas?
Oh Lord.
That'd be kind of weird, wouldn't it? What would that
That's let's
what would
not
that lever look like exactly?
I don't God, Austin. Here's the thing. So something that illustrates this is that when she's like, spewing out all of this stuff about voting, and gosh, she like really tweets all the time. It's just incessant. But one of her many simps, that's one of the ironies of her doing this, but one of her many simps posted this graphic that showed the percentage of the U.S. government spending contributing to the GPD, and when that did I say that GDP?
GDP.
Sorry, GDP. Yeah, sorry. Anyway, and when that happened, and it's this graph showing how it goes, like it spikes, and it spikes right around, the late mid 1930s, late 1930s, and it kind of, there's a little bit of a climb in the late 20s, and she was like, oh, this is when women started to have the right to vote. And I'm like, wasn't there some other little historical event that happened around that time, maybe like the Great Depression? It's just
Yeah.
dumb stuff like that.
All righty. Not all women vote for big government. We know that, especially the ones who are watching the Wake Up America show. We're grateful to have you here today. Make sure you click that like button if you're watching us now and enjoying the content, and subscribe to the channel that you're watching us on. Nice to see all of our friends over on Rumble this morning. European Tin Beater, Kermode Bear, Bluethrike, and Will Run Riot. Will Run Riot says women do overwhelmingly support Democrats, but could that in part be because a lot of Republican men and women say that women shouldn't have the right to vote?
I mean, sure. I think right now it's certainly, reflective of where we are culturally and, you know, taking into consideration the effects of feminism. So I don't think that that's entirely surprising. And it's not surprising given the, fundamental differences between men and women. I think a lot of people look at this issue because let's be real, this is a very online issue.
Mhm.
And you're probably not aware of it unless you're very online. And a lot of people that I interact with on a daily basis would be like, "What are you talking about? And why does this even matter?"
Mhm.
And so I think that's a good question. Why is it important? And I think it's because, politics is downstream of culture. And maybe one of the mistakes that we've made in the past and why we see some of the things that we're facing now is because we ignored some of the signs we're that there's this very real backlash and now we're experiencing that because we ignored some of the problem signs before. And the thing is I think that the risk in not paying attention to this issue now and figuring out ways for people on the right to address this in a really healthy, productive way is that we don't want the pendulum to swing to the opposite end where we're, back to, men just having the control over everything because, there's not either extreme is not healthy. So I think that, it's not good to ignore this because a lot of people, especially if you're in politics, you're like, okay, the people who are aware of this and who are watching this stuff, they're not our target voter demographic. They are not the voting demographic. Well, guess what? They will be in 10, 15 years.
That's a really good point, Camellia. I'd like to switch topics here to a tweet that you shared with me from another online influencer. She's Ashley St. Clair. And forgive me, I've only followed her just a little bit. I know she's got like 700,000 followers. I think she works at the Babylon Bee. But I know that she had like a scandal or something like that involving like pornographic pictures or videos that she used to do or something like that, which
I'm not
makes
sure.
sense. That's when you're a young girl and you're kind of cute and you lean to the right. You're gonna get a lot of attention if you did porn, but it doesn't. But we forgive that kind of stuff on the right. On the left, they put it on the right. Yes, she said this. This is a tweet that she wrote, and it's a couple paragraphs. So forgive me if I read it in total here for our audience, and then I'll let you respond. She says, "You know how often I see men showing off their girlfriend or wife's cooking on social media, bragging about how she takes care of the kids? Hardly ever. You know how often I see men commenting on a woman's physical appearance, liking thirst traps on Instagram? All the time. Women typically mirror the desires of men naturally. If men don't like what women have become, it's a direct reflection of their desires, or at least expressed desire. In a way, looking at the state of modern women is a direct reflection of modern men. If less women cook and want children, as the stereotypical trad trope goes, maybe it's in part because men have not shown women that they value femininity and caretaking in the same way they value arm candy for status. Your thoughts?"
So I think this is a really fair point, and she's actually responding to what Pearl has been putting out lately. And there's been this big deal because Pearl keeps putting out there this kind of red pill trope that women are more attractive in their 20s than in their 30s. And the thing is like that's all that she says about it. So it comes across as negative, and especially when it's like constantly being put out there in different iterations. And so a lot of women, tend to get very defensive about that and they react. And that has what has just, like fed the monster, so to speak, is like so all of a sudden all of these women, including some, higher profile women on the right would be posting, pictures of themselves at, 20 some and then pictures of themselves now at 30 some and totally giving into that. And so I think what Ashley was talking about is that I think her point is fair in that a lot of what we do see in the content that women put out and what has kind of become the norm is in response to what men want. And, you know, this I think is probably something that was not as much of an issue until we had mass media. And then because there was more of an outlet for that and it became much more visually apparent, it became it became disproportionately normative. And so I think that there has been this extra pressure and influence for women to, post the Instagram pictures, the
Mm.
e-thoughts and all those kind of things, and men respond to that. Maybe it's not.
it's kind of a chicken and the egg scenario
Sure,
in some sense,
sure,
right? Because it's supply and demand in some ways. If
right,
you kind of look at it from an economic model here, there's demand for it. There'll always be demand for it. So the supply exists. And we're talking about, I guess, thoughterry here. Thottery, if that's a word. Um, Eh, so I guess you can't sort of blame the supply side for the demand, right? It's kind of like the war on drugs, of being addicted to, beautiful images of beautiful women, or, the attention that you give to it. There's like this feedback mechanism where a man has this desire, a woman fulfills the desire to an extent, right? By posting a photograph online and seeking, engaging in attention seeking behavior, and then she's rewarded for that attention seeking
right.
behavior. But
Yep.
here's the thing. Do you think that, without, to some extent, even without the demand, women have an attention seeking desire? So if absent the demand, right? Because you have to consider, once women have passed a certain, we'll call it the wall, right? If we're getting into the red pill terms here, once a woman has passed a certain amount of desirability, there's no demand, but there's still a supply, meaning that they're
Sure.
still acting like hoes. I mean, excuse me, 304s. you know,
I mean, maybe I think, but the thing is I think in our current culture, we see a lot more of that just because it has been amplified and rewarded so much due to our online and our access to it. So I think that's why I think it's disproportionate to maybe what it would be normally. And so yeah, it's not like, because men are not necessarily rewarding, pictures of you, posting pictures of your pies or whatever if you're not also posting pictures of your collarbones and cleavage.
no, somebody's gonna make a pies joke. If you're just tuning into the Wake Up America show, I'm Austin Peterson. I'm glad to have you here. This show does get a little PG-13 at times, and so we try and keep it under rated R, but it does sometimes cross that line. Thanks so much for tuning in. Make sure you click that like button if you're watching us today. We've got a bunch of people watching us over on Rumble, but we got to get some likes over there. Why don't you click like on that stream, drop a comment, introduce yourself. Same thing over on YouTube. We'd be grateful to have your support with a simple like and a subscribe. We'd appreciate that very much. Camellia, so in terms of how women's behavior is molded by men, in that sense, it kind of, bolsters the argument for men being the leaders in a way, right? Because if women are sort of responding to female desires, there isn't a mirror aspect of that, right? Women, the problem, like with like the war of the sexes here is what we're talking about to an extent, is that like women don't actually signal what they really want in a man, but men at least are signaling what they want in a woman to an extent, right? They want a beautiful woman, right? And if she's posting photographs of herself, I mean, that is a legitimate male desire. I think that probably bothers a lot of women, right? And it bothers a lot of traditional women who would prefer that women aren't out there displaying their buttocks and, pose, in a bikini, shooting an AR-15, what have you, right? But on the other side of things, I mean, women don't really communicate to men what they actually want in men. And it's not necessarily because they're not articulate or they can't articulate. It's that usually what women display in terms of their desires of men is kind of the opposite of what they actually want, meaning that women will tell you they want a sensitive, sweet, kind, artistic, loving, caring, provider male, but those aren't the kind of men that they actually date.
True. I think that I think that women that we do believe that, I don't think it's that we don't want those things. I think that's true. But there's also and a lot of women don't like to admit this, there's also that desire for men to be dominant, for them to take the position of authority in the relationship. And so I think that's, we've seen the balance of that upset quite a bit. And the problem with it is like so many things, when you go extremely one side or the other, basically you're getting into collectivism, like we've talked about before, and we start to ignore the individual component. And when you talk about the red pill community and why that's important for men in their response to, what feminism has done to the culture. Um, that's why I really dislike, women like Pearl because bit of a hot take, I actually really don't think that women have any business, being therapists or, counselors or instructing men on what they need to do to develop their masculinity and to be better men. I just
Whoa, whoa,
that's
whoa,
like
whoa. That needs to be dissected on its face right there. And briefly, I want you to get into that, but I just got to read a comment. Daniela Pensack, apparently she is also champing at the bit this morning. She's in the comments, and we're going to talk to her at 8:30, but she says it goes both ways. Women are reflective of men's desires and vice versa. Women are not inherently extensions of men only. I agree with that. All right, now Camellia, could you please like explain a little bit more in detail what you were just saying?
Sure. I mean, I think that the best mentors and counselors for men are men. Maybe this is something, part of this is probably something that I I probably get some of this from how I was raised, but I also think just relationally, men are better suited for that because they understand that. It's not like women can't understand it all, but as a woman, I can do what Pearl is doing, and I can parrot these talking points, and, and there are other women who are doing this too, and
Quite
I saw
successfully.
well, yeah, absolutely. It's a total grift because the irony is that I could parrot these talking I can tell men what they want to hear, all of the negative things about women all day long, and they will simp so hard because I am feeding into their belief system. I am validating their feelings
Mhm.
about their, success or failures with women. And if I never go beyond that, what good am I doing? All I'm doing is I'm not doing women any good if I'm not talking about what women can do to improve or what some of the positive or the things that we can actually grow and change and learn from this. And I think that's the huge difference. I saw another woman who kind of does some of this stuff, not to the degree that Pearl does, but made a tweet that said, I'm so done with guiding men, through this, and I was like, well, there's your problem, honey, is the fact that you think you can guide men through this process for which you really have no personal context for. And I think that that's the difference in what women like Pearl do and what men who have been in the red pill community or leaders in it, so to speak, for a long time do is they don't just talk about, I mean, yes, they talk about some of the negative things about women and some of the realities and biological imperatives and all those kind of things. But they also talk about what men need to do for themselves. And this is on both sides. This is what we need to do. We are all we all have an obligation to fix our own stuff, take care of our own stuff, be responsible for our own behavior before we start, expecting that of someone else.
I do find it fascinating that you'll have all of these rad trads or radical traditionist ladies who live their lives constantly online rather than going outside and touching grass and raising kids. And then they proceed to lecture men about what is a real man and how a man should act and behave. And then only men who are listening to them are these simp men that they don't want, or what we call in the manosphere beta male orbiters, right? The men who like circle around her globes and it's fascinating that that is the scenario that they operate under, but it's an entirely hypocritical scenario. So, are you saying, Camellia, that men shouldn't listen to women in regards to advice when it comes to dating or relationships? You did
Uh,
sort of say it. You did sort of say
yeah,
that.
sure, absolutely. I would unequivocally say yes to that. If I, anytime
Now you're
that
telling me
you
what I
hear
want to
me.
hear.
No, I'm not.
Yes, you
I mean,
are.
you might want to hear it, but I'm saying it not for you. I'm saying this because I believe it. But
Okay, all right.
I'm saying that if I personally am going to be talking about this issue, I will talk about this issue because I find it fascinating because I think it is important culturally. I also think it's interesting, from a human nature psychology perspective. But if I am going to tell men, if I'm going to direct them in a way, I'm going to guide them to the resources. Like, there's one oh my gosh, I just lost the, name of it, but there's one that I have that I retweet all the time on Twitter that is a great source of good things for men, and, there are certain people in the red pill community that I would refer them to as well. Art of Manliness, that's the one I've talked about a lot. I just think that's a much better way for them to do that.
If you're just tuning in to the Wake Up America show, good morning. I'm Austin Peterson. I'm speaking to Camellia Peterson. We're just friends. We're not family. We're not related. And if you're enjoying the content that you're watching this morning, make sure you click like and subscribe to the channel. We'll be glad to have you join us because the Wake Up America show is every Monday through Friday from 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. Central. So it's a great way to start your day if you're getting ready in the morning or getting your kids ready or getting ready for work, what have you, to listen on the way to work. Just to tap us into your Bluetooth speakers on your computer and whatever it is in your car so that you can listen to the show. Every Tuesday and Thursday, I speak to Camellia Peterson about issues like these in the news of the day. Today just happens to be the day we're talking about red pills and things like that. So, in regards to taking advice from women, it's kind of like that old saying. If you're a fisherman, should you take advice? Do you take advice from how to catch a fish from the fish? It's kind of like that, isn't it?
Sure, sure. I mean, I think this goes for women too. Can
Right.
men make observations about, women's behavior and our tendencies? Sure. Do I think that that is going to be what persuades a woman to look at herself and to examine herself? I really think that that probably needs to be a women's space in doing that. And I actually wish there were more reasonable resources for this. I've said this for quite a while because unfortunately, so many of the resources for this for women that are on the conservative end of things are people who actually interact with Pearl like this. There's traditional godly wife, or I don't know, something like that. But these are people who are kind of on the crazy end of things, and they get that way because they say really controversial things, like if you tell your husband no, and like he decides he wants to anyway, he can do it while you're sleeping, and that's okay.
Oh God.
So yeah, I mean, like this, like, we go from one extreme to the other, but I do think that, there needs to be something, like some of these resources you have in the red pill community. I think there needs to be those things for women as well.
It's a really good point, Camellia. Is there anything else on this topic that we haven't covered that you think that we should get to?
Well, I will tell you, I'll drop this in the chat here in a few minutes, but I watched a video because I tend to binge a little bit when I go down these rabbit holes, and so, I've been watching some different videos, and there's one I just watched by, Ryan Stone, who's somebody who's been in this community for a long time, and it was very nerdy. It talks about E prime statements, and it talks about how and he was addressing it to men, of course, but it's applicable to women. But he was talking about how we um, frame our thinking, how we think about ourselves, and our locus of control as far as the idea that we are responsible for our behavior, and that how we talk about someone else, how we think about someone else is very much affected by how we frame that. For example, the e prime statements is basically when you use something with a is are, type verb. Like instead of saying, Austin is smart, you know, I should really frame that and like why? I mean, like I'm labeling you and I'm fitting you into that box and nobody knows what that means. And so you begin to act that way. But when I say, um, Austin is really great at grasping concepts and remembering things very quickly and, does a good job of teaching people, those concepts. That defines what I'm talking about. It just doesn't stick a label on you.
That makes a really good point. It's not sticking labels on there. I prefer labels just because I think it helps us to categorize things, but
Sure.
keeping an open mind is always wise and important. Camellia Peterson, you are at Rare Camellia on Twitter, and you're our regular Tuesday and Thursday guest. Very much enjoyed it today, Camellia. Thanks so much. Oh, yes or no? I guess real quick. Should women be allowed to vote?
Yes.